Hello Raptors fans and welcome back to Raptors Report. Today we are going to be discussing the Toronto Raptors game against the Houston Rockets. But before we do that, we are going to talk about the man of the hour. Yes, rookie Ja'Kobe Walter, who had a fantastic game last night. And I kind of want to get in depth on him, talk about who he is, what he has been able to do, why I'm so excited about him as a prospect, and all of that good stuff. So without any further ado, let's jump in. So Ja'Kobe Walter is 20 years old, born in 2004 in a small town outside of Dallas, Texas. And he was named after two NBA legends, Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan, two of the best shooting guards ever to play the game. And if you're a shooting guard in the NBA, which Ja'Kobe is, those are two pretty good role models to have. Ja'Kobe was a very highly recruited high school player. He was ranked number 8 overall by ESPN. He was a consensus 5-star recruit. Really exciting and interesting prospect coming out of high school. And he committed to Baylor, where he played 1 year and left after his freshman season. And he had a pretty up and down 1 year in college. The first half of the season, he was an absolute bucket for Baylor, shooting just under 6 3-point attempts per game at around 37% and 42% from the field. And he was averaging about 15 points per game on a solid true shooting percentage of 57%. So he was really living up to all of that promise. That was in the first 17 games of the season. So in the final 18 games of the season, his field goal percentage was only 33%, his three-point percentage was 32%, and his true shooting percentage was only 52% as well. So he was still shooting a lot of threes, and that's kind of why his true shooting percentage never truly went completely underwater. It never breached the Mendoza line of 50%, but it was definitely a big drop-off. And I think that you can thank your lucky stars that he did not have that great of a second half of the season, because he was really looking like a guy who's going to go top 10 in the NBA draft last season. Of course, when you're a really good high school player, consensus 5-star recruit, you go to college in your freshman year, you blow the doors off, teams are going to look at you very strongly as a top 10 pick in most drafts. And last year's draft was not very exciting, didn't have a ton of great prospects, but if he was really able to show out in the second half of the season instead of having a slump there, he would probably not be available to the Raptors to draft at 19. And if you're liking what you're seeing, if you are enjoying the process of watching Ja'Kobe Walter this season, then you have to admit that perhaps that was maybe a little bit of a good thing that he didn't have a great second half to his college season. One thing that we have to square away right now, because for people who aren't watching the games, I think that there would be a very big divide between your opinion on Ja'Kobe Walter if you're watching the games and if you're not watching the games. Because if you aren't watching the games, it would be very easy to write Ja'Kobe Walter off. Ja'Kobe Walter, even with his big evening last night, 27 points on only 18 shots. In 15 games this season, Ja'Kobe is only averaging 8.5 points in 20 minutes a game, and his percentages are pretty poor, 38% from the field and 28% from three. So you're probably, if you don't watch the games and you haven't really been keeping track, maybe on this channel, because I have been talking about how he's been coming on and how I'm impressed with the process, you would probably be saying, okay, this isn't that impressive. He's not really having a great season. What I have been seeing from him in terms of his skill set, in terms of his strengths as a player, what he has been able to do with the ball in his hands, his defense, there are so many very promising things that I am seeing from Ja'Kobe Walter. His mindset, what he looks like going to the basket, that is a very important thing as well. And then again, I've mentioned it a couple of times before, the form on the jump shot. Those are all things that pass the eye test with shining colors. And I'm a big statistics guy. I think statistics can give you an alternate view, maybe let you consider things that you didn't consider before. It can give you a good 10,000 foot view. You say, okay, this is interesting from a statistical standpoint. Why don't we start taking a look at the game tape and kind of figuring out what this player is like, watching the games and seeing the statistics. It all weaves together. It's all information that you can use in order to get a better understanding of what's happening on the court. So I'm not completely discounting statistics, because I think that once you get to a certain point, you better be delivering statistically. One thing that statistics aren't very good at are when it comes to scouting. I think that when you are trying to evaluate and project forward, sometimes statistics don't do a good job of capturing what a player has the potential to be able to do. Statistics can't tell you whether a player's form on his jump shot is broken. When you're trying to evaluate a player, the mechanics are something that you have to take into account. Mechanics and repeatability and how a player looks when they're taking a shot is very important to projecting whether a player is going to be a good shooter. His shot looks very good. Another thing that I am really impressed with in terms of what Jacoby Walter has been able to do is his ability to drive into the lane. Jacoby has a great first step, and I think that that is something that the Toronto Raptors have really been missing on this team. I think there are a couple of good drivers on the team. So for example, RJ Barrett is a good driver into the lane, especially when he gets a screen to get going. He has a very rugged body. He can bounce off of players. He's good when he gets into the lane. He's good at attacking closeouts. I think Scottie Barnes can kind of rumble into the lane. He does the thing where he drives in and posts up and then drives and then posts up. He can do that kind of herky-jerky type thing to get into the lane. Gradey Dick has been impressive, especially from where I considered he could be to where he is now, where his first step is actually not that bad, especially when attacking a closeout. But when it comes to the top offensive players on the team, I don't really see a guy who has an elite first step. I don't see a guy who can really explode past a defender who is in position to guard. Players will get into a stance, and I think a lot of the times when it's not an advantage situation, like you're catching somebody on a closeout, a lot of the players that I mentioned before this have trouble attacking a player off of the dribble. Not so with Jacoby Walter. One thing that I really am noticing with him is that explosive first step, that quick twitch muscle where you're able to just in an instant just snap off of the dribble and get into the lane. That is one thing that you can't teach. It is all about genetics. How quick can you just burst off of the dribble and get into the lane? He's got that. I really noticed that even when teams are in a defensive position, he can get past them. So that's one very exciting thing about him. Another thing that I really like about him is the ball handling and kind of in-between decision making. So once you've taken your man off of the dribble, the other thing that you need to have is the ability to navigate between bodies and get into the paint and finish. And one of the things that I've really noticed about him, and you can call it footwork, you can call it ball handling, there's also an element of basketball processing there. You have to be able to figure out where you're supposed to be moving. He's showing me something there that I'm like, okay, this is starting to look a little special here. And that's another thing that maybe statistics aren't able to capture unless they really start to finish at a high rate. But that in between, once you have that advantage and you're able to sort of nimbly weave your way through towards the basket, that's what top level scorers have. And I'm starting to see that from Jacoby Walter. You get that spider sense where you're watching something that's special. Last night, he had some fantastic drives and dump offs, like these little passes where you've drawn that extra defender. Okay, what's the next step? And for a lot of younger players, once the extra defender comes over, that's it. You know, they're taking a difficult shot and they're trying to get it up over two guys. But Jacoby did some very impressive things last night where he was able to find cutters to the rim and get it to guys who are able to finish. When you put all of these little elements together, you're starting to see something grow. Like you're starting to see the elements, the little signifiers that tell you that there's something worth developing. Another very encouraging sign, and it's something that really needed to happen because it was starting to get a little worrying, was the shot. So in the first quarter of last game, Jacoby Walter was on fire from three. He was making heat check after heat check after heat check. He really just exploded on the Houston Rockets. And I believe that he probably in the scouting report, he started the game. So I'm sure that a well-prepared team like the Houston Rockets would have him on their scouting report saying like, here are his tendencies. This is what he's shooting from the field, from three, etc. They're probably saying, you know, this is a guy that you can help off of. This is a guy that, you know, maybe make him prove it before we start respecting him from the three-point line. And boy, did he ever exploit that lack of coverage last night when he was just nailing three after three after three. That was so exciting. Man, I got so hyped watching that. As I've mentioned before, one of my favorite things in the NBA is when a player can get crazy hot where they're just nailing shots. That is one of the hypest feelings in basketball, when you can see a guy on your team going nuts and banging shots, and boy, was he ever doing that. So one game. Okay, one game. I'm not overreacting to one game because I have been mentioning it prior to this. This is not some kind of like, oh, I'm flipping the switch, now I'm a Jacoby homer. I think to mine and a lot of the other media members who are truly watching the team and really breaking down the film, this is a guy that has been showing us stuff that maybe is not showing up on the stat sheet, but nonetheless is getting people who understand the game of basketball excited about him as a prospect. And I'm really excited to see him develop along with the team. I think that could be a storyline moving forward through the season, because we're not getting a lot of other types of storylines, maybe team storylines where they're winning games against good teams. What we're looking at right now are development storylines, and Jacoby Walter has been a very pleasant surprise for me, at least. Really excited to see what he's capable of now and in the future. But I think that's a good jumping off point. We are going to get into the player evaluations. And why don't we just continue it over from what I was just talking about, because Jacoby Walter had it going last night. He was fantastic. His first quarter was electric, where he was making heat check after heat check, as I mentioned. But another thing is just the confidence. You are starting to see, and I think that this is one good thing about what I've seen from this team coached by Darko Rajakovic. Players seem to be playing within the system, but at the same time being confident in their abilities as a player. There is a slow growth of all of the different players on the team. It feels like their confidence has grown step by step, block by block. They're being built up, they're being given opportunities, they are showing what they're capable of. It feels like things are growing in the correct direction. Jacoby Walter is no exception to that. It feels like his confidence is a huge element to his game. He is putting shots up, regardless of whether they're going in or whether they're not going in. So he can take a ton of shots, miss a lot of them, and it doesn't seem to be affecting him very much. He plays with passion and energy, and he's really going out there and trying to make a difference, especially on the defensive end. He is very good at tracking players around the court and staying in front of players and not allowing clean drives to the rim. He was guarding Dillon Brooks last night. Dillon Brooks had a good game. Dillon Brooks is a rough and tumble guy who is consistently putting his body into you and doing that kind of stuff. Jacoby Walter is a rookie. He's not as big as Dillon Brooks, but he was fighting. He was going and competing against him. I think there were a couple of fouls where it could have gone either way, and he picked up the foul. I mean, it's not a huge surprise. He is a rookie, but I think that he does a good job. I think that especially in switch situations, when he has to cover other players, perimeter players, he does a really good job of moving his feet. But at the end of the day, Bill Russell said it best. This game is about buckets, and man, did he have an impressive game. The shooting was super impressive. Getting into the lane, finishing at the rim. He did, of course, the Houston Rockets were closing out like crazy on him after that really impressive three-point streak, and he knew what to do. He attacked off of the dribble and got into the lane and made a bunch of layups. And then when he was asked again, he started hitting three-point shots again. Like, really, really, really impressed with the maturity and the composure, and I'm so excited to watch this guy as he develops as a Raptor. I'm very excited for him as a prospect. Next up, let's kill the elephant in the room. Scottie Barnes had probably his worst game that I've ever seen him have as a pro last night. Nightmare game. Bad process. Bad results. He got completely stifled by a really, really, really good defender in Dillon Brooks. Dillon Brooks is one of the best perimeter defenders in the NBA. The guy's really strong, really fast feet. He's a pest and a kind of a maniac. Really gets under your skin and attacks you. He makes you nervous to dribble around him because he's got great hands. He is just an all-world defender. We've seen it for Team Canada. I mean, they had this guy guarding Wemby. Really did a really good job on Wembanyama, probably one of the best I've seen. He is a menace. That said, Scottie Barnes took too many threes, went 0 for 8 from 3, and 2 for 15 from the field. And I understand when you're up against a player who is taking away your drives to the basket and is a really good player at disrupting drives. Maybe you're not super confident in handling the ball around this player. It's going to be tempting to put up three-point shots. And the Raptors are leaning heavily on him to produce and to create shots for other players, and they're putting the ball in his hands a lot. Last night, the process was wrong. And I understand the mindset. I understand why he was doing it. I still think it's wrong. If you're 0 for 6 from 3, maybe don't take 2 more three-point shots. It was a nightmare. It was certainly one of the worst games I've ever seen him play. And I'm not going to let him off the hook. I thought it was horrible. Darko Rajakovic, he's come out and said, look, he's still injured. He's still dealing with an ankle injury, and I get it. He does have an ankle injury. He's probably not feeling 100%. I don't know what the thought process is from the front office, from the coaching staff. If he is that hurt that he has to play this way, I would rather just not have him play, or play in a different capacity. Maybe don't have him be the lead ball handler. You know, if he's not able to fulfill his role in that position because he's injured, have him play a different role. Have him on the floor and setting screens and doing that kind of stuff. Don't have him be the lead creator if it's going to look like this. He did have a good defensive night. He had a bunch of steals. He was disruptive. He was boxing out, grabbing rebounds, doing all that stuff. But I'm holding him to a different standard. I think everybody on the Toronto Raptors is, and he needs to be the best offensive player for the Raptors, along with being the best defensive player as well. So yeah, not a good game from him. And yeah, so that's that. Next up, we will talk about Gradey Dick. Gradey Dick, I thought, had a phenomenal offensive performance last night. He had 14 points on 9 shots. He was 2 of 3 from 3. He had 2 rebounds, 6 assists. A lot of the assists were so nice. Just really great decision-making from him. He connected with Ochai Agbaji. He connected with Jacoby Walter. He was really, really good off of the dribble last night. He did have 3 turnovers, but still 6 assists, 3 turnovers. Totally live with that, especially from your off-ball guard. The 2 shots that he made, the 2 threes that he made, were not easy shots. These were not open shots. The Rockets were not letting him get open and shoot open shots. He was definitely on the scouting report, and he made some big-time, what I will call certified shooter threes last night, where he came off of screens and turned and fired and banged shots that were contested, shots that were not easy shots, banged them. And that was really encouraging, because I don't think that Gradey Dick, when everybody is healthy, is going to have the same amount of shots that he is having while the players are injured. And I think that he'll be asked to take a lot of these shots where he comes off of screens. And if they're running a play for him, a lot of the time that is going to mean coming off of screens and hitting more difficult shots. And it's really nice to be able to see him make those types of shots. So I thought he had a good night on offense. On defense, there's still some problems. There were a couple of times where he's caught flat-footed. I feel like the physical limitations are starting to show up. There was a possession when he tried to pick up Jalen Green in transition, and he just got completely caught flat-footed. Going one way, Jalen Green exploded to the rim and just went right past him. And that is going to be a problem for him, I think, for his career. I think that his, unlike, say, Jacoby Walter, who I think has that really great quick twitch where he's able to change speed on a dime, Gradey's going to have to think through it a little bit more and give up certain things to not allow that to happen, where you cannot allow that kind of penetration. And if it means gapping players, and if it means conceding more open shots, then that's what's going to have to happen, because there were a couple of possessions where they were looking to attack Gradey Dick off of the dribble. I thought there were some good defensive possessions last night. I think that there were a couple of switches where Fred VanVleet got the switch onto Gradey Dick. Gradey Dick did a good job of moving his feet, staying in front of Fred VanVleet, and then contesting the shot. I think there were a couple of very positive moments from him on that side, but there were a couple of just like, moments where it just was not good. And that's going to happen. I think that what I'm aiming for with Gradey Dick, because I see the potential for him as an offensive player, I just want to see average. I don't want to see, stopper. I don't think that's in the cards. I want to see average, and I think he can get there. Another player who had a really good night, and he is starting to get back into that consistency, Ochai Agbaji. He was the team's second leading scorer, 15 points on 14 shots. He was 1 of 3 from 3, so not the greatest shooting night, but he was able to make it happen on offense. Not an invisible night from him. 5 rebounds, an assist, a steal, only 1 turnover. This guy rarely turns the ball over. He can do a little bit more with the ball in his hands now. He is not a one-dimensional player. I think he did an okay job on defense. and last night was a good night from him. I thought that he was one of the best players on the floor for the Toronto Raptors. I'm continuing to see a lot of positive growth from Ochai, especially if you're a role player, you want to be consistent, you want to bring it every night, especially on the defensive end. So really liking what I'm seeing from him. Jonathan Mobo started the game at center for the Toronto Raptors. Well, we'll say just in quote center. He was one of the bigs. I think Scottie kind of played the rim defender role. I think Scottie did a good job in that capacity. Mobo, I don't think, had a great night. He was not really stopping the Rockets from getting on the offensive glass. And that is one of the biggest things that you've got to do as a big. Clear the glass, make sure that there's not a ton of second chances. And the Rockets out-rebounded the Raptors last night. They were +7 in offensive rebounding. And I think a lot of that is because of the size of the Toronto Raptors front court. Jonathan Mobo is an undersized center. I think that he lacks a little bit in the defensive rebounding perspective. He's good on the offensive glass because it's not all about boxing out and using your size. It's about athleticism and effort. He didn't have any offensive rebounds last night. That is usually his calling card. He's able to get on the offensive glass. It wasn't as impactful as I've seen him be. And he only played 16 minutes last night. I think really just because he was not bringing some of the intangibles that he does usually bring on a nightly basis. So not the greatest night from him. I've been impressed with his performances this season, so I'm not overly worried or anything like that, but I'd like to be able to see him do a little bit better than last night. Next up, this was a big bounce back game by Chris Boucher. Chris Boucher tied Ochai Agbaji for second leading scorer with 15 points. He was 6 of 11 from the field. He was 2 of 5 from 3, so 40%. That was great. And some of the shots were just baffling, like horrible shots. But they went in, and this is the kind of Chris Boucher where you're the no, yes. And we know he can do that, where he can hit bad shots, and that's why sometimes you got to kind of swallow your pride and just go with the flow. And when he is doing that, sometimes he makes that big impact where he can help your team, and he really did. He and Kelly Olynyk, I think, had a great standoff of the bench with the two of them together. I think that the Rockets are a good team for those two to play against because they don't have a ton of size on the inside. They don't have to really worry about those traditional centers that are going to get into the paint and score. Şengün is definitely a load on the inside, but you know what I'm talking about. The centers that are 7 feet tall and really big on both ends of the court. Şengün's not really like that. He's more of a finesse guy, even though he uses his body too. But I think that this is the right kind of matchup for a Chris Boucher. And he had a good night. He still makes mistakes. Don't get me wrong. I'm not going to say that the guy plays the, picture perfect basketball. But when he is playing a game like last night where he is making more good plays than bad, you really appreciate what he brings to the team, which is energy, hustle, and fearlessness. So I think he had a really good night last night. And 4 assists too. I just glanced down at the box score. He made some nice passes, and these are not just easy, kick out passes to shooters. He would drive into the paint, and then when they would cut him off, he would make a really good pass to a cutter. And I think he could do that every night. I think he draws enough defensive attention. I think he can make better plays. I think that he has that in him to do that every night. So I'm just kind of curious why he doesn't, because I think he's kind of an underrated ball handler. He can handle the ball a bit in transition. I think he could do that in the half court, make plays for other players too. So good night for him. Kelly Olynyk, I thought, had a great game, not just on offense. So Kelly Olynyk, the book on him is that he's not a good defender, not a good rim protector. I thought his rim protection and defense last night was good. I think you got to give him credit. And it's not about blocking shots with him. It's about swipes. It's about poking the ball loose. It's about being in the right position, being annoying, fouling guys when the ref isn't looking, doing all that veteran kind of sneaky stuff. And he did all of that last night. The bag of tricks was on full display on the defensive end, and I thought he did a great job. And he did a good job on the boards too. He was one of the best rebounders on the team. He got 9 rebounds, 4 assists, 2 steals, a block. He did turn the ball over 5 times, but I think he had a really good game. I think he provided the Raptors some quality minutes. He was 2 of 4 from 3. That's really important. Teams are going to be looking. One of the big things that I look for when I'm scanning a box score or looking at a player's per game stats or whatever, I'm looking at that 3-point percentage. I'm sure that a lot of GMs are doing the same thing. How is this guy going to help my team? Well, the shooting threes is a big part of that. So hopefully he's able to continue to hit threes. like he did last night. He was 50% from 3, 2 of 4, so happy with that. I think he had a great night. Speaking of great nights, it was a great night for the bench in general. Jamal Shead. What a game from Jamal Shead. I think maybe burying the lead here. I think he was probably the best player off of the bench. He was guarding Fred VanVleet. He was really making it tough for Fred VanVleet. These guys are kind of like the Spider-Man meme, pointing at each other. Very similar players, very engaged in games. They've got that dog in them, both of them, and he did not make it easy for Fred VanVleet. He was going around screens hard. He forced offensive fouls because he was going around the screen so hard. He was really on top of Fred VanVleet. Fred VanVleet had a miserable game. He was 1 of 10 from the field. A lot of that was just Jamal Shead. I thought he was fantastic last night on defense. And then on offense, he had a double-double, 11 points, 10 assists. On 5 of 7 from the field, he had a 3, 2 steals, a block. He blocked Jabari Smith in the corner. Jabari Smith is 6'11". The guy is he's a good three-point shooter. He gets that shot up high. Jamal Shead blocked his stuff, sent it back. 6 rebounds as one of the smallest players on the floor in 33 minutes, and he earned every minute. Man, he was great. And man, is he ever coming on. I'm so glad that this guy is having a bounce back, because he did have kind of a little bit of a slump there between the beginning of the season and right now, but he has come back in a big way, really rewarding the Raptors for picking him up. So happy with his game. And then moving along to the last player I'm going to mention here, another great game, Jamison Battle. And he did what he does. Hit shots, 3 of 5 from 3. He had 11 points, 4 rebounds. He was 4 of 7 from the field. I thought there were certain possessions where he played good defense, and that's his Achilles heel, is bad defense. But I think the refs were letting guys get away with some physicality last night, some bumping and grinding. So kudos to them for not just calling it one way. I think Jamison Battle, he did get called for a couple of fouls, but there were certain plays where he was able to use his body and bang into guys and make them miss shots. Hey, small victories there, because he's not the greatest defender, but I will take it if he's able to make a couple of defensive plays, make it difficult, get some stops. That's what I want to see. And then on the other end, this guy is so good at hitting open shots. When teams leave him open, boy, does he ever make them pay. And he's probably in the scouting report, but he does move up and down the arc. It's not just corner threes for him. He can hit them at the top of the arc. That's what you need if you want to be able to be an elite three-point shooter. And he has been fantastic this season from shooting the ball. He's up to like 45% from 3. I think they got somebody here. I think they got a guy. His shot looks good. He's able to get it off quickly. He's a tall guy. It's not like he's a shrimp that could get his shot blocked over and over again. He's shooting over guys too. So love what I'm seeing from him, especially last night. Loved it. The game in general was a 2-part game. The first half was great. The first quarter, especially with Jacoby Walter, and there were a lot of really positive highlights. I think Gradey Dick and Jacoby were really feeding off of each other. I think Ochai Agbaji was a really positive force. The bench looked great, gave them a lift. In the second half, the screws tightened. The Raptors suffered too many turnovers. They're the younger team. The Rockets aren't like an ancient team, but they have a lot of good vets, and they have a lot of long, athletic guys that can force turnovers. They're one of the best defensive teams in the entire league, and they got the Raptors to turn it over. They flipped the script. The Raptors were able to turn the Rockets over a lot in the first half. In the second half, the Raptors turned the ball over a ton. Unfortunately, the biggest culprit last night, and I think probably the difference between a win and a loss. I think if we got a normal game from Scottie Barnes, I think that the Toronto Raptors win this game. He had a nightmare game and they lost. 114 to 110. They made it close in the fourth quarter. The Rockets really just kind of did a march where they got a stop and a score, stop and a score, stop and a score, stop and a score, and just built that lead into the fourth quarter. The Raptors were able to pull closer toward the end, but eventually they fell under the weight of the Houston Rockets, who are a good team. I'm not surprised by the outcome. I thought that the Raptors were going to lose this game, but with the first half that they had, I was hoping that maybe they could win it. Didn't end up happening. I'm not that upset because there were so many really positive performances from the Toronto Raptors. Next up, the Raptors play the New York Knicks today at 7:30. I'm excited to watch that game. Unfortunately, the Toronto Raptors will be on the road, so that's not a great sign. The Raptors have been very poor on the road this season. I mean, they haven't been very good at home, but they've been even worse on the road. Knicks are one of the best teams in the conference. The Raptors are on the second night of a back-to-back. I'm not expecting big things from this game, but if RJ Barrett is back in the lineup, I didn't even mention RJ Barrett. I probably should have, but he's been ill for the past 2 games. If he is back, he's playing against his old club. I think he could have a big night. He's been off for a couple nights. Maybe he'll have the energy to push the Raptors. I think Scottie is going to be looking at last night's performance and saying, like, what can I do? How can I show guys that this is not who I am? I'm expecting a big night from him. And then hopefully the bits and bobs, the guys, the young guys, the bench players, all of that have a decent performance. I'm not expecting big things. Usually young players and role players play better at home. So I'm not expecting a huge night from anybody, but I am hoping to see Scottie bounce back. And the Knicks do have a couple of question marks guarding the basket. And as we know, RJ and Scottie like to score there. So maybe we'll see something a little bit better from the 2 of those guys. And yeah, that's the episode. What do you think about Ja'Kobe Walter? Are you as excited watching him play as I am? Are you maybe more concerned with his statistics? Like, if this guy is so great, why isn't he producing on the stat sheet? Well, let me know here in the comments, and also on Twitter and Blue Sky, where you can reach me at Raps Report. I love talking to Raptors fans. I try and answer as many of your comments as possible, give you some meaningful feedback, so leave me a comment there. And also leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you enjoyed the content, that always helps the channel grow. And as always, thanks for tuning in to Raptors Report, your source for in-depth Raptors content.